call the clerk.
Private members' business, notice number 4, Ukraine. Motion to be moved by the member for Adelaide.
I call the member for Adelaide.
I move the motion relating to the Ukraine in the terms in which it appears on the notice paper.
Do we have a seconder? Oh, okay. Sorry. The member for Adelaide has the call.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to move this motion. Friday the 24th marks 1 year since the full-scale unlawful invasion of the Ukraine by Russia. On that day, the lives of 40 million Ukrainians changed forever. The invasion has resulted in a toll of destruction, many thousands of human casualties, and the displacement of over 14 million Ukrainians. Ukrainian families have been torn apart as they were forced to make the difficult decision whether to stay or to go. But the world order has changed as well on that day, Deputy Speaker. Suddenly there was a war in Europe, a war that could spread to other territories, a war that threatens to escalate and threatens democratic values, a war that impacts on the availability of basic essentials for people around the world. On February 24th, the world became a more dangerous and precarious place for everyone. The stability we had come to take for granted over the years was over. And yet, for all the ways this war has impacted people in countries around the world, it is the Ukrainian people who are truly suffering. To the people of Ukraine, I say, our thoughts and our prayers are with you. I commend your strength, courage and resilience in the face of this aggression. And, Deputy Speaker, we will continue to support the people of Ukraine. We will continue to support you and stand with you. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was an unprovoked attack. It was in blatant disregard for the intentional rule of law, and it is a direct violation of the UN Charter, which protects everyone's sovereignty. Deputy Speaker, we must continue to speak loudly and clearly against such acts. This invasion continues a pattern of illegal and immoral aggression against Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Australia continues to stand with Ukraine against Russian aggression. This immoral and illegal invasion is something the whole of the Australian Parliament stands in unity against. And I was proud to stand with my parliamentary colleagues in the House of Representatives from and the members of the opposition, everyone in the chamber, in solidarity with the Ukrainian people. We have provided Ukraine with military and humanitarian support, as well as refuge for displaced people, and will continue to do so. On the 24th of February, 1 year from Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the government reaffirmed its support for the people of Ukraine. We announced additional support in the form of uncrewed aerial systems or drones. In February, 200 Ukrainian soldiers graduated from the Australian-based training that's occurring in the UK under Operation Kudu. And I want to take the opportunity to thank the Australian Armed Forces for the vital role that they are playing and have played, Deputy Speaker. We also announced additional sanctions against the further 90 people and organisations who are involved in the Russian war machine. Our sanctions have hit more than 1,000, and we will continue to act in coalition with other democratic forces around the world to impose these sanctions. This war is causing damage, not to just the people of the Ukraine, but also the Russian soldiers and the people of Russia as well, who have no idea of what the future holds, and especially the soldiers who are being sent to the front line. This war will result in only death, destruction on both sides. The people of Ukraine, led by President Gillespie, have shown incredible resolve when we see what they've been through in the last 12 months. Incredible resolve and courage to withstand an invasion by a much larger and more powerful country. But this has come with enormous sacrifice, of course. In the face of this sacrifice and constant pressure from air raids, attacks and atrocities committed by the invading forces in Ukraine, the Ukrainian people have stood tall, Deputy Speaker. The Ukrainian people are not only fighting for their country and their sovereignty, they are not only protecting themselves, they are also fighting for every person in the country who cares about democratic values and the rule of law, the rule of international law. And that's why we here in Australia and in this Parliament and in this place will continue to stand with the people and government of the Ukraine.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the motion?
I second the motion and reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. I call the member for Wannon.
Thanks, Deputy Chair. And can I just commend the member for Adelaide for his fine words and just say on this issue, all of us stand at one. All of us stand at one. What is happening in the Ukraine is beyond despicable. It's beyond deplorable. It is absolutely devastating. And all of us know and agree that Russia should immediately cease its hostilities and withdraw from all territory in Ukraine. That is the only way that this abhorrent war can be brought to an end. And I'm sure all of us call on Russia, and in particular President Putin, to cease and to withdraw and to take the responsible action that he needs to take at this time, because the suffering is too great. And it's suffering not only are we seeing in Ukraine, but we're also seeing as a consequence in Russia as well, through the loss of life of Russian soldiers, through the harm that it's doing to the Russian economy and to the very fabric of Russian society. So there is very good self-interest for Putin himself to act in the morally, ethically and responsible way as well. But for the people of Ukraine, our hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to you for what you are bearing at the moment. And all of us in this Parliament and right across our nation stand with you in your bravery and extraordinary courage in way that you have tackled the current war that you are fighting. I think all of us have been absolutely almost taken to a place where we never thought we could be taken when it comes to such courage, when it comes to just an extraordinary ability to defend one's sovereignty, to defend one's liberty in a way that I think we often wondered we all had in us. But the Ukrainians have shown that they do have it in them. And it has been nothing but inspirational, the way that they have fought. I think many of us were worried that the war could have been over in 1 week or 2 weeks. But the way the Ukrainians have fought has been quite remarkable. But it is not over. And as we've read recently, just in the last couple of days, Russian forces are continuing to advance in some territories in the Ukraine. And that is why the rest of the world has to stand with Ukraine in its fight. We have to make sure that we continue to provide the military aid. Now, Australia has gone beyond what most countries have, and I think it's time all countries stepped up and followed our lead, led by the immediate response by the Morrison government, followed by the response we've seen from the Albanese government. We have to ensure that the rest of the world continues to provide that military aid, and in particular military hardware, to enable the Ukrainians to respond, and respond in a way that will see the Russians defeated. We've also got to make sure that we continue to look after the Ukrainian people. Now, we've done that here in Australia. We've taken thousands of Ukrainians and we've given them the option to be able to spend some time here, to settle here while the war continues. And we've got to make sure that we continue to provide that sanctuary for the Ukrainian people while they deal with this abhorrent war with Russia. Can I just end by acknowledging the contribution that has been made by the Ukrainian ambassador here in Australia, and also by the leaders of the Ukrainian community here in Australia. Vasil and Stefan have done an extraordinary job in rallying the Ukrainian people here in Australia and making sure that their interests are incredibly well represented. I had the great honour of going to the Ukrainian Catholic Cathedral in Melbourne to commemorate the 1 year anniversary of the war starting, and to see the Ukrainian community still with that strong spirit of the need to make sure they defeat this adversary and protect their sovereignty was extraordinarily special.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Spence.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Speaker. The anniversary of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine was a sad realisation that many had made in recent times. It is difficult to believe this war began just over a year ago. For some of us, this realisation occurred upon the visit by Ukraine's ambassador to Australia in this building just a few weeks ago. It certainly would not feel like yesterday to him. It certainly doesn't feel like yesterday to the thousands of brave men and women fighting against the Russian troops across their home soil. It certainly did not feel like just yesterday to the thousands of Ukrainian Australians, many with family who have come under harm's way or have, like millions of Ukrainians, become displaced by this senseless war of aggression. The day was spent in many ways across this country, such as a vigil held on the steps of Parliament House in my home state of South Australia, to protest in front of the Russian embassy right here in Canberra. Some may say that Russia would take little notice of such things, but we cannot sit idly by and let the world see. Let Russia see. That day pass without any reaction on our part. We must maintain this vigil with our words and with our actions until peace is restored again to the region. And without such vigilance, we play right into the hands of Vladimir Putin. For I am sure he is banking on the West to have a short attention span, or an empathy deficit due to conflict being far away enough to be merely a spectator sport. We cannot allow for this to happen. This is why we stand up in places like this, the Parliament of our nation, in order to amplify and deliver messages such as this. Acting Deputy Speaker, I thank my South Australian colleague, the member for Adelaide, for moving this motion here today. It gives me the opportunity to speak out in support of Ukraine, in support of our local Ukrainian diaspora, in support of scores of Russian Australians out there who are equally as horrified by the actions of the Russian government of Putin. And to speak in support of the hopes of all of us, the restoration of peace and the return of Ukraine's sovereign territory, so they can take care of their wounded and rebuild many shattered cities and critical infrastructure across ever-changing front lines over the course of this conflict. The admonishment of Vladimir Putin and Russia's government is not one of Russia's people. After all, we're not all tarred and feathered by the actions of our governments, whether those actions are that of policy failures or, in this case, vaulting well over the bar of what we would define as an atrocity and an affront to peace and decency. In Australia, we can all speak up and speak out on the decisions made by our governments and elected officials. But as we know, this is not the case everywhere in the world. It is certainly not the case in Russia. Speaking out against Putin, the Kremlin or other senior government officials often puts one in as much peril as the soldiers on the front lines. Many have attempted to escape, but Putin has made it difficult to evade his wrath. Though many deaths remain inconclusive as to what exactly happened or who was ultimately responsible, it is a common theme that speaking out against Putin is a very dangerous endeavour. Australia's place in the world is one of the peacekeeper. We were a founding member of the United Nations after its establishment at the conclusion of World War II. We, along with 50 other nations, ratified the United Nations Charter. We were the first president of the United Nations Security Council all the way back in 1946. Back in a day where the West and East joined together to stamp out evil, to stamp out the hubris of petty despots and tyrants. But, Acting Deputy Speaker, the peacekeeper though we may be, we play our part well and in lockstep with the rest of the free world in this ever-changing global paradigm. Dr Jeff Raby put it quite well in Australian Foreign Affairs 16, which was published late last year. Upon the election of our government, you would expect many countries to have received a visit before venturing into Eastern Europe. It doesn't signify a lack of importance that we place in the region. But the fact our Prime Minister chose to visit Ukraine within months of taking office shows a shift in our view and the world's view. For if we divert our gaze for a moment at a time we run the risk of atrocities to go unchecked and a proud people to suffer further. I stand with the Ukrainian people. We cannot give up or halt our efforts until peace exists. Slava Ukraini.
Thank the member and call the member for Mitchell.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. 1 year on from the illegal invasion of Ukraine, of course, the toll on the world stands very, very high. And it's appropriate that this Parliament mark solemnly the deaths of 7,000 people that we know of, the displacement of 14 million people in Ukraine, and a world torn apart by the consequences of Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And Australia, of course, is a nation dedicated to individual freedoms, human rights, individual rights, stands very firmly with our allies in Europe and around the world to stand up for Ukraine and the citizens that are fighting this war, the people that have banded together to stand up to this great evil. And it's a situation that we've seen on repeat in recent years, an investment that we have made as a country far away on another side of the world in a people who are fighting for their liberty and fighting for their basic individual and human rights. Vladimir Putin in recent times has been responsible for atrocities around the world, whether it started in Chechnya, in Syria, in Georgia, in Ossetia, in Crimea, and now in Ukraine. The pattern is clear. The tyrant that is Vladimir Putin, who has publicly stated he asserts to re-establish the Soviet Empire, an empire that was responsible for the deaths of 60 million people. He seems to think that that is a worthy objective, and he certainly made a good fist of it with that horrible list of atrocities through all of those countries and his wrecking ball that he is now applying to the world and to Europe. So it's only right that Australia is sending our military aid, $655 million in total aid, but $475 million in military assistance, and of course our humanitarian aid and compassion to aid the Ukraine people in their defence. It's allowed Ukraine to recapture 54% of the territory that Russia has initially invaded. And given the awful surprise attack and the overwhelming odds against the Ukrainian people, this is a stunning achievement. But it's been bought at the cost of the lives of several thousand people already and 14 million people without a home. We welcomed people from Ukraine here at the beginning of this conflict, and we continue to welcome those that need safe harbour, that need temporary protection, that need to flee. But of course, people who've come from Ukraine want to return to a safe and secure country that is protected from Russia. And so we continue to support the effort, the war that is being waged on behalf of free peoples all around the world. And I commend very much our partners in Europe for the leadership they've shown. In recent times, Europe has faced strife economically, it's faced social strife, it's faced a refugee crisis, the greatest displacement of people that we've seen since World War II hit Europe. And Vladimir Putin at every turn has sought not to be a good partner or friend to the countries of Europe, but he has sought to take advantage of each of these crises, whether economic unrest, with his unconscionable actions in cutting off power and controlling the power supply through the gas to Europe, whether it be through his deliberate manipulation of refugees and the greatest refugee crisis since World War II in Europe, whether it be through his illegal invasions and activities in countries in the Middle East and throughout Europe. And when we think about our partners and friends in this regard, the countries of Poland and Lithuania, Romania, Hungary, these are great countries who have come to Australia after World War II before, migrants who've come here and established a home and built communities fleeing a great evil in Europe. Many of us are here because of that great evil, and many Ukrainians will come here again and we welcome them. But we must not give up 1 year on the people of Ukraine or the nation that Ukraine has shown itself to be, forging itself in the fire of an illegal invasion against a hideous despot, a new tyrant of our age, one of the world's worst dictators who has no regard for individual rights or human life. The people of Ukraine are fighting a war for freedom in the world today. They're fighting a war for their families, they're fighting a war for Europe, and they're doing so at their own expense. It's right and proper that the Australian government continues to support it. It's right and proper that we have a united and bipartisan commitment to support Ukraine through this period. And I know that Australia, being the nation that it is, the carefree, the happy-go-lucky people that we are, will never forget the downing of MH17 of the people who died from the Netherlands, from Australia, our citizens shot down by Russian tyranny. We will never forget that. We'll never forget our friends in Europe. We'll never forget the people of Ukraine. And we fully support 1 year on everything that Ukraine is doing to defend itself and establish itself as a country of freedom in Europe.
Thank the member and call the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. 24th of February marked 1 year since Russia launched its illegal and immoral full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The war raging as we speak is an unlawful attack against Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It has now resulted, according to US estimates, in 200,000 dead and many injured. At least 40,000 civilians have likely died in the conflict. 140,000 buildings have been destroyed, costing around $350 billion US. 14 million Ukrainians fled the country when war broke out, and 7 million are internally displaced, and these are mainly women. Deputy Speaker, the Russian invasion is not a limited war bound by the laws of armed conflict and the UN Charter. The images of civilian bodies lying in the streets of Bucha with their arms tied, shot after being tortured, which are clear war crimes, are too fresh in our minds for any of us to fall for that. Russia is pursuing a total war that aims at nothing less than the destruction of the national, cultural, religious and democratic institutions of the Ukrainian people. The initial Russian war aim was not, as Moscow's propaganda machine parroted to its own population, a clinical intervention to denazify a country led by a Jewish leader. It was not. The goal was regime change. The initial Russian war plan was to storm Kyiv, kill President Zelensky and install a puppet regime. And this plan failed because it met with the irresistible force of the heroic and effective resistance of the Ukrainian armed forces, which frankly stunned the world. And Russia's plan also failed because it met with the awe-inspiring reaction of a genuinely people's war. Within days, Ukrainian society mobilised en masse. Many young and old Ukrainians joined the armed forces and territorial defence units by the thousands, not simply because they had to, but because they wanted to. Compare that, if you will, with the 700,000 young people who fled the country during mass mobilisation in Russia. Countless Ukrainian civilians also joined the war effort by flying reconnaissance drones, raising funds, and even, in the case of Ukrainian farmers, literally towing away enemy tanks. Now, the Russians have greatly underestimated the Ukrainian people. They also dramatically underestimated the sympathy and solidarity that their resistance would kindle for Ukraine around the world. The Kiel Institute for the World Economy estimates that 46 countries gave the equivalent of $168 billion in financial, humanitarian and military aid from the start of the war. Now that's immense when you consider that Ukraine's GDP was $290 billion in 2021. Deputy Speaker, I wish to acknowledge local advocates in Darwin, including Northern Territory Ukrainian Society President Tatiana Hoffman, for their leadership on this issue. With Tatiana and supporters, we gathered in front of the NC Parliament to mark a year of the war. And last week in Melbourne, I caught up with the Ambassador, Vasil, and reiterated our solidarity with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini. Thanks, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member and call the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. When His Excellency Vasyl Moroshenko pitched to be Ukraine's ambassador to Australia, he felt, given his background, it would be a role all about commerce, economic development and trade. Building business links between his nation and ours was to be a priority for this Chevening scholar, who is a Master of Sciences in Politics of the World Economy from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Mr Moroshenko arrived in Australia directly from the Ukraine capital Kiev on 26 March 2022. Russia had invaded his homeland little more than a month earlier. As Mr Moroshenko told the National Press Club in Canberra on 24 February 2023, marking 12 months since the invasion began, his work here has been chiefly military matters, not enhancing trade opportunities as originally intended. In fact, he's had to be more of an arms dealer than an ambassador. So much so, he has earned the nickname Vassal the Bushmaster for his advocacy to obtain the world-renowned Bendigo-built infantry mobility vehicle. Australia has delivered upwards of 90 Bushmasters to Ukraine to help in the fight against Russia. Describing the Bushmaster as handy and hardy, Mr Moroshenko went even further, saying it is the Anzac spirit on wheels. He added, "Ukraine is lucky that Australia is in our blue and gold corner." And that said, 140 other countries are also on Ukraine's side. Mr Moroshenko said Russia's actions were not only a war on Ukraine, but a war on democracy. How very true. He said Ukraine was being hit with, wait for it, 20,000 Russian bombs a day. That's about 15 every minute. 15 every minute. You could just imagine. The goal for Ukraine, he told the press club, is to win in 2023 for the world's sake. It will be won by all on the side of democracy, being beyond brave. Earlier in his address, Mr Moroshenko said thousands of Ukrainian citizens had been killed during the illegal and immoral invasion. And we've all seen those images of the maternity wards of hospitals being bombed beyond repair. This is an outrage. This is disgraceful. And the world needs to unite even further to do all we can to help those Ukrainians. Now, Ukraine is a major supplier of grain and food for countries in the Horn of Africa, and they are now facing starvation. They are facing famine, and the member for Moreton knows this. He and I have had a number of discussions about this. This is because of the disruption to supplies and supply chains because of the Russian invasion. Russia has compromised the food and energy security of so many countries, Mr Moroshenko said. Australia has been a real mate to Ukraine, standing up to a bully. Now, closer to home, my hometown, Wagga Wagga, we have a Ukrainian musician there. Her name is Larissa Burak. She is a beautiful human being, Deputy Speaker. She continues to raise funds and awareness through concerts, and she can play the traditional Ukrainian instruments. She can sing. Her version of the Ukrainian anthem has to be seen to be believed. It makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck. And she's been speaking at many events about the plight of her beloved country. And while she's a long, long way from home, being in Wagga Wagga, her heart is still very much with her homeland. And I understand that. It must be so difficult for her. She said she believed Ukraine would ultimately prevail, but we need a lot of help. And she's right. Now, Ukrainian embassy's charge d'affaires, Vladimir Shelevinsky, was given a civic reception by Wagga Wagga City Council on 16 September last year, and he returned to town on the 21st of December to catch up with Uranquinny veteran Damien Nye. And he is doing a fantastic job, Damien this is, to provide humanitarian aid to those in Ukraine. And he's being supported in that cause by Wagga Wagga Rotary Clubs, and particularly the Rotary Club of Wagga Wagga. And I well recall on the 3rd of March last year, Wagga Wagga held a prayer vigil in the Victory Memorial Gardens for those in Ukraine. The number of people who came out from all backgrounds, all sides of politics, young and old, was quite frankly astonishing. But not really when you think about it, because Wagga Wagga is a very much peace-loving community. Wagga Wagga is very much a diverse, multicultural community. And when our friends get the treatment that they're receiving from Russia, we stand as one. And that's what Wagga Wagga did, and we will continue to help the national efforts to help Ukraine.
Thank you. Call the member for Blair.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to speak on this motion and commend my good friend, the member for Adelaide, for moving it. 24th of February marked a year since Russia launched its illegal invasion of Ukraine. It's a sombre occasion for the people of Ukraine. We mourn the incalculable loss this country has endured a scale of war we've not seen in Europe since 1945, and we're deeply saddened by the human suffering and the global crisis in food and energy security that's affecting Europe and Africa, as the previous speaker said, caused by Russia's action. We honour the unwavering resolve and strength of the Ukrainian people as they stand up to Russia's continual aggression. We're proud to stand with Ukraine as it defends its people, its territory and its sovereignty. At its core, this is an unwillingness of the Putin regime in Russia to accept the independence of Ukraine. Russia's attack on Ukraine was an attack on all countries and on the fundamental norm of territorial integrity and sovereignty. It's not new. Just under a decade ago, the aggression in Crimea was on full display and, sadly, without significant international condemnation or response. The Russian president, in an act of real doublespeak that George Orwell would have been proud of, signed the Treaty of Accession on the 18th of March 2014. That act of accession actually is an act of annexation, illegally taking Crimea into the Russian orbit. It's got nothing to do with denazification. It's got nothing to do with Christianity. And it's everything to do with what Simon Sebag Montefiore in his brilliant books, The Romanovs, and Stalin, The Court of the Red Tsar, talks about. The act of Putin could be anything that Peter the Great or Catherine the Great did during the Romanov era from 1613 to 1917, or indeed the affliction and oppression and starvation perpetrated by Joseph Stalin on the people of Ukraine in the 1930s, forcing the dispossession and dislocation of millions and the starvation of millions in the Ukraine. This has got nothing to do with democracy. It's got everything to do with the dictatorial regime that cannot understand and cannot accept international rules or liberal democracy. And the attacks and this defence of so-called the family and of religion by Vladimir Putin offends me and offends people who call Christianity their faith and who believe in family values. It's got nothing to do with that. The international community must take and has taken collective action in relation to this. For our part, as an Australian government, we've imposed costs on Russia. We're proud of doing partners in contributing to the defence, economic and humanitarian assistance. And recently, when I was in Belgium and France, meeting with politicians and people in the EU, it was quite clear they recognise Australia's contribution to the support, humanitarian as well as military. In addition to the Bushmasters, we have provided additional military assistance. We have provided, for example, uncrewed aerial systems to the Ukrainian government. This support's provided battlefield intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capability to the Ukrainian armed forces as they continue to fight against Russia. The announcement coincides with the first graduation of about 200 Australian-trained Ukrainian soldiers as part of the UK-led multinational training effort to the Ukrainian armed forces. And they leave with skills and knowledge that will save lives. Just think of the damage done to the economy. We're seeing an assault, the number of bombs being inflicted and dropped on the Ukrainian people that is like Verdun or the Somme. It's like the Battle of Kursk or Stalingrad that they're getting inflicted upon them and they're suffering from. We've joined 140 other nations to support a resolution calling for a just peace in Ukraine. A just peace involves Russia leaving the Ukraine and I think paying reparations to the Ukrainian people for what they've inflicted upon them. It's an utter disgrace. It's not only unethical, it's immoral what they've done. Children being taken from their families, there's sexual assaults and raping of women and children, and it is utterly offensive, can I say, for those people who claim that they're doing it in face of what they think is a country that's opposing them. It's not about faith, it's about war.
Thank you. I'll call the member for Fisher.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank the member for Adelaide for moving this motion. It's a motion that I support, along with all of my parliamentary colleagues. There has not been one dissenting voice in this chamber, and that's a good thing for Ukraine, it's a good thing for Australia, and it's a good thing for democracy. Just over a year ago, Russia unlawfully invaded Ukraine. The decision was illegal, it was immoral. It is the invasion of a democratic state, another democratic state, is in this case absolutely illegal and immoral and unethical. It is an assault on democracy, it's an assault on decency, brought by a man who, I don't use this term lightly, but I believe him to be evil. It's right that we continue to call out Vladimir Putin for his war crimes, his hate and aggression. And I'm glad to see that a bipartisan international effort on the part of the West is supporting the Ukrainian people. When I was Speaker in the last Parliament, it was one of my proudest days when the President was given the honour of addressing a joint parliamentary sitting. It's something that I believed that Australia should press for, to show the world and the people of Ukraine that Australia stands with Ukraine. And I want to send a shout out to the Ukraine ambassador to Australia. He has done an absolutely sensational job in defending the rights of his country, men and women. Vasyl Marashenchenko is a remarkable human being, and he really deserves all the praise that we can give him. The Australian government, when we were in power, and I'm very pleased to see that the Labor government has continued with the same sort of assistance that we have provided as a nation to the people of Ukraine. 70 ADF personnel are currently training Ukraine armed forces in England as part of Operation Interflex. We've provided $655 million in direct support, including $475 million in military aid. Australia is the largest non-NATO member that has provided the largest support to Ukraine, and that's something that Australians should be very proud of. Australia has sanctioned some 1,000 Russian oligarchs and defence and politicians, and I'm very proud to say that every single one of the members and senators who sit in the House of Representatives and the Senate have had the same so-called honour bestowed upon them. We have been sanctioned by the Russian government, and I'm very proud to be sanctioned by the Russian government. We've provided 90 Bushmasters, and I'm proud to say that a local company, Anyquest, in my electorate provides the generators for those Bushmaster vehicles. At the same time, we continue to raise international pressure on Russia to do the right thing, with a coalition of 140 United Nations member states calling for a just peace. I want to also send a shout out to a local business, whilst not in my electorate, is on the Sunshine Coast. It is the efforts of this local business which has heartened me most, and I know that they've been of encouragement to the Australian population as well. From church services and vigils to protests and flash mobs to school projects and street art, Australians have shown solidarity with the people of Ukraine and with international democratic values. Just last week, an organisation called Sunshine and Sons have donated money from the sale of their gin to the war effort and the people of Ukraine. It is a good cause, and we stand with the people of Ukraine. Slava Ukraine.
Thank the member. The time allotted for this debate has expired. The debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made an order of the day for the next sitting.